Hello, it's Friday, another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. As always, I'm here, John Zogby, with my son, Jeremy Zogby, and I always ask him first and foremost, how are you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing good, and I'm doing well. And I have a question on my mind, and I think it's a big week to ask this all important question. Is Donald Trump the victim of a witch hunt? How's that for a topic?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
up for it? Okay.
yeah.
You want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Whatever you want.
All right. Um, to a smaller degree, yes, I think he is. I think that the going back to January 2017, um, uh, neither the media nor the Democrats offered him what is the traditional rite of passage for victory, which is you grant a honeymoon. And what you do is you allow, in that first 100 days, the new incumbent president to either, in the words of Tip O'Neill, give himself enough rope to hang himself, or allow him uh, to deal with Congress and with the American people and to move an agenda on the basis of victory. As far as the media is concerned, this is normally when a love fest begins and the media kind of backs off a little bit and says, all right, fellow is new in the White House, and give him a chance to establish his credentials and likability with the majority of the American people. And then from there, once the rules of engagement are met, then you proceed. The press gets tougher, the opposition gets tougher. I don't think there's any question about the fact that Donald Trump was not afforded that opportunity. I think that the guns were blazing from the very beginning. On the other hand, Donald Trump did not obey tradition either, declared war, in effect, a new American revolution. This was an angry and hostile new American revolution, and he had made a number of media enemies already, and had made significant efforts at neither courting nor reaching out to the other side. He's going to do it his way, and in a lot of ways, I think, asked for his own trouble, welcomed his own trouble, and as we've talked about many times before, cultivated his own trouble because it worked for him. Never a majority favorite in the polls. He had enough, and enough intensity, and enough rallied to his side, for him to last the 4 years. I believe that the role of Congress was not appropriate, no matter how egregious some things and some evidence appeared. I don't think Congress should be spending all of its time investigating. Yeah, to be sure, it's part of the legislative process, but to be sure, we also have courts. And if there's criminal behavior, that's where it goes. I do know there's an impeachment procedure, but I also know, because you cannot send a president to a criminal court or civil courts while he or she is in office. Nonetheless, what Congress did was it violated, I believe, all the rules of propriety, spent its time focused on getting Donald Trump, and I think committed serious political failure in the process by not realizing, or perhaps realizing, hey, we might be able to get the votes in the House to indict or impeach this guy, but we're never going to convict him, which leads to the question, why? I mean, why even bother? Meanwhile, where's the legislative agenda? Where's the success, and so on? Pox on both sides on this, not excusing Donald Trump at all. I think he's a disaster, and I've said many times he may not end up being the worst president in American history. Remember, there was James Buchanan and Andrew Johnson and Millard Fillmore, who are clearly in the basement, and will remain in the basement as far as that's concerned. But Trump, probably the worst person ever to be president of the United States. Nonetheless, I think it's time to leave things up to the courts, let the courts decide. But this week, and then I'll stop, the Durham report was just really over the top, where it finally concluded that the FBI had an agenda against Donald Trump. They utilized that agenda, and that there really was no evidence whatsoever or serious evidence of Russian collusion, something that the Democrats had perpetrated among their base and among the American people. So I think this was a very bad week for the Democrats, and I think especially since Donald Trump's numbers went up again, it was a bad political week for the Democrats. So there's my take, kind of right down the middle.
Do you think that the Durham report holds any weight?
Well, it depends on your definition of weight, to quote another president, Bill Clinton.
No. I mean, let's just say, is there anything legitimate about it, or is it a farce?
I'm not in any position to judge the merits of or the detail or quality of the report. I only know what I've read or seen. But bottom line is, politically, it did not hurt the president. And I think that I don't think independents will now say, I'm moving away from the Democrats towards Trump because he was unfairly treated. I think it doesn't have any net political impact whatsoever.
Okay.
What do you
think?
All
right. Well, I'm going to start with this basis here, and allow me to develop an idea. But I like to be coming from comparative history. I like to compare events, and I think that if you look at what happened under COVID 2020 in terms of the mere flood of information, I'm confident in saying in all of human history, there has never been an event that has created the flood of information. There was a tsunami and avalanche of information coming out every day. I'd never seen anything like it. It was overwhelming, confusing. And one thing it did was it created a mind virus, for sure, a panic, a fear, and paralyzing for many, even including myself. But I compare that with 2016, and I can walk away knowing that, because in 2016 I saw the same thing when Trump was elected. There was another virus in 2016, and that was a mind virus, and that was the full-fledged panic from the media communicating to its base, the Democratic voters, signaling to them to go into a tizzy. And you and I would go traveling, and it was very commonplace to hear in various meetings people opening up to us and saying, in 2016 and 2017, during the beginnings of the Trump administration, to say, I'm feeling physically ill. These were Democratic voters who were watching more than likely CNN. So that was a flood of information up until that point, like I'd never ever seen before. And so we start with this backdrop. And so to answer your question is, yeah, it does look very much like a witch hunt, because it has been a moving target. We can't get him on this, we're going to get him on that. We can't get him on that, we're going to get him on this and this and that. And then when we throw it all against the wall and nothing sticks, then we go back. And so we're still talking about Russian collusion. We're still talking about sexcapades and accusation of sexual abuse or whatever, paying Stormy Daniels to shut up, and this woman, that woman coming out and saying I was abused or attacked by Trump. And here we are 7 years later, and we're still talking about this. Of course, then there's January 6th too. But because I don't have a home on either side of the warring camps, and by the way, I want to throw this out there too. You know, when I watch this happening, it reminds me of the movie Space Odyssey 2001 or 2001 Space Odyssey. You remember that beginning where our ancestors, the monkey man, if you want to call them, the early very, very human prototypes are fighting over a little pond, and they go into war mode. That's where I see Republicans and Democrats behaving like that. And so I just went over everything Trump has been accused of. But remember, let's not forget about Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. That on the other side, there's accusations, there have been for a while, about the Clinton Foundation and some of the shady things that were alleged shady things that may or may not have been going on. I'm not going to take any sides. The email server story, which by any measure of any justice would, no matter who did that, would be considered an egregious crime. The Steele dossier and the notion, this is what Durham says, that the Clinton plan, as they called it, was to fabricate this intelligence and pin the blame on Trump, when in all actuality, there are allegations that Clinton herself and the Podestas leading up to 2016 were in touch with the Russians, and that there was a plan to do technology transfer to and that Podesta and Hillary Clinton led the effort to share technology with Russia that would allow Russia to create its own Silicon Valley. And so those are allegations. And then Biden. I mean, look, I've been aware going back to 2014 about Hunter and Burisma. This stuff only really caught traction in mainstream media with the Hunter Biden laptop. And now we find out that if this is true, who knows anymore, because we're flooded with so much information. It's very hard to track these things, but there are allegations, and maybe there's proof that Blinken, who was a Biden campaigner who became our Secretary of State, immediately upon hearing about the dropping of this Hunter Biden laptop story, started motioning out and reaching out to intelligence agencies to get something going regarding a statement that had 50 signatures of intelligence agents saying this has the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Now we find out it wasn't Russian disinformation. There is a laptop. There is content on the laptop. So my question is, in going through these three big scandals, how many Americans think that all of the above are guilty? I'm afraid, in fact, I would bet a lot of money that most Americans are going to take a partisan stance on this and say, no, not my guy. Those people, yeah. Oh no, put them in prison. Ban them to an island, whatever. They're treasonous. But very, very, very few Americans will say, you know what? I think Donald Trump created an insurrection or a riot. I would like the word riot better than insurrection. A riot on January 6th, and he should be served justice. I also think that Hillary Clinton and the email server or the Steele dossier, whatever, very well possibly colluding with Russia herself, but blaming it on Trump. I think she's guilty. And Hunter and Biden and the Biden family have received foreign kickback, and I think that they're all guilty. And there are very few citizens who would say that most people are engaging in partisan politics and protecting our guy and saying, no, it's them. And I think that's foolish. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm sorry to be brutally honest. I think it's foolish. And I think it's likely that all three are guilty. And I go back to my question, how many Americans think that way? And the fact that very few do is very troubling. And I think it's very telling of the situation that we're facing in this country today.
So we have some polling out. You know it better than I do. Just this past week. In fact, I think you did. You released it when we asked voters, who do you blame for the hyper partisanship? And more people said the other party. But didn't we find a substantial number of people who said my party and the other party as well?
Yeah. And I have two different questions on this. And I'll even get into it to show why the results change.
That's an interesting finding. I want you to develop that. First one too.
So let me go back on a timeline. I asked back in October this question. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The problem, the real threat to our democracy is not the other party, but it's both parties actively dividing the public and scapegoating the public. And so when I asked that, 70% agreed. And so when you get into that territory of 70%, you're going to see that similarity across the board party-wise. So by and large, Democrats, Republicans, and independents all agree with that statement with that intensity. And so I think about that. Now, hold that for a second. When just a week ago, we fielded a survey, and I went with the old A versus B, which statement comes closer to your view. And statement A, my opposing party is to blame for hyperpolarization. 35% of voters thought that. Looking at the party breakdown on those who say that it's primarily my opposing party, 43% of Democrats think it's the Republicans, 35% of Republicans think it's the Democrats, and 22% of independents, well, they have two opposing parties, depending on actually where they lean. But when you go to the choice, both parties about equally, that's 50%. So almost a majority of voters think that both parties share equal blame. That's 40% of Democrats when broken down by party, 51% of Republicans, and 62% of independents. I think this is game-changing messaging, because what it reveals is that when we kind of remove the polarized and hyper-partisan jingoistic language, we find that most Americans, most voters think that both parties are to blame. The reason why those two questions are different in terms of the percentage, remember 70% agreed that both parties are actively dividing us and scapegoating the other side, and that is the real threat to democracy, not your opposing party. 70% agree with that. 50% say it's both parties equally. The reason why that drops 20 points, this is my understanding, is because when you poll and you allow voters to choose a bucket one or bucket two, what's almost always going to happen is the public will follow suit, and they'll be at loggerheads. There'll be some division. But I find that if you have a sensible message that portends to a little bit unity, like I did with that one about the real threat to democracy being both, 70%, that's just the nature of it being an agree disagree question. I think it's easier for Democrats and Republicans alike to find the common ground, because the question wasn't partisan by nature. This question, giving you the choice, my opposing party or both parties, it shows a little bit more partisanship. And so I think that's why the support is about 20%, and not the support, but there's a 20% difference in the messages. One is more divisive, and one is more unifying. And so the lesson in all of that is that when we poll, or when you have a candidate, and I'm finding this over the year, who explores unifying messaging, I'm finding that there's a great potential for that. And so the long story short is that we're used to being in this paradigm of divide and conquer politics, and it's become so commonplace, it's so woven into our political landscape, that there's a whole new market, there's a whole new frontier that's virgin territory for someone to come along and really harness that. And so what I'm seeing is I think there's potential to grow what I call the unity market. We just need the right group of people to do that.
Okay, we covered a lot. We obviously will have plenty of time in the future to talk about Ron DeSantis. This was a big week for him as well. No need to get into that now. He's going to announce next week, and we'll probably be talking about him next week. But bottom line, in summation, yes, there is reason for hope about our politics, but for now, those engaged in institutional side of our politics, those who are in elected office, those who deal with messaging, those who make policy, I think are locked in to a dangerous politics of the past. The original question, is Donald Trump the victim here of witch hunt? I think the answer is not. I think he's a partner in the in his own witch hunt, and I think in many ways he utilizes it, thrives on it. By the same token, I think the Democrats have made a terrible mistake by letting this dominate so much of their conversation. And I hope that we could beyond it. Just let the courts go on from here. I'm signing off on my end. Last word?
Yeah, like you've always said, there are no good guys.
Yeah.
Maybe the perpetrators on both sides need to be locked up, right?
Lock them up. Okay. Have a good week.
You got it. You too.
Thanks.